Welcome to this first class intended for teachers and parents on teaching classical grammar. As I've said, the purpose of this course is different from other courses that we offer in that it's intended for parents and teachers, and what I'm going to be doing in this class is surveying all of classical grammar and commenting on the art from the perspective of one responsible for teaching, not just for studying. I understand that many who will watch this class and participate in this class won't actually have had experience studying classical grammar, and I'd like to assure you that with a little bit of patience and diligent use of this class, I think we can cover enough of the principles and the methods that are necessary to be successful, even if you haven't had the opportunity to study these subjects on your own. In our generation, that's pretty normal, so it's an obstacle that we simply have to overcome and try to put our children in a better position than we were put by the generations before us. So in this first lesson, what I'd like to talk about are two important points. First of all, the role of a teacher, and secondly, the goal of classical grammar. We know that grammar is one of the arts of the trivium, one of the classical liberal arts, the 7 classical liberal arts. Now, what we want to understand is what those liberal arts actually were and what role grammar plays within the broader range of liberal arts. What's different about the liberal arts is that they apply to all sciences, all studies. They're general arts or skills that are used in all studies. So for example, ethics may be considered an art because it has a practical end. But ethics is a specific category or a specific investigation within philosophy. It doesn't apply to all other arts. Grammar, on the other hand, applies to all studies, all philosophical sciences, even mathematical sciences. Grammar was traditionally called the janua artium, which means the gateway of the arts. And so we want to understand that grammar, first of all, is a liberal art that's pursued for the sake of all other arts. Now, what grammar actually is the study of language. It's the study of words and sounds, the parts of speech, sentences, and speech in general, even up to the preparation for rhetoric, where we try to get into issues concerning persuasion and things like that. So grammar is the foundation, it's the entry gate into all of the other arts. And if we don't start well here, we really have no hope of leading children through advanced studies down the road. So grammar is very important, which is why the old schoolmasters had a saying, the beginning is half of the whole. We really want to lay a strong foundation in grammar, because if we do that, we're already halfway there. So that's an understanding of the importance of grammar. Now, as for the role of a teacher, this is what's challenging in our generation. To give an illustration, a teacher is simply a guide, and we assume that a guide has been to the destination, that they know how to get there. And so the role of a teacher is simply to lead travelers, as it were, on a journey to a destination that the travelers don't know how to reach. But the teacher, because he has experience, has been there before and knows the way. He's not a source of knowledge. He's not a source of the information. He's not the destination itself. He's simply a guide to help students successfully reach that destination. Now, it's important to note that Jesus says of himself that he is the only teacher and that we are all disciples. That's important because it clarifies for us the role of a teacher. Christ is the only person who can be a teacher, or who can be the teacher, because he alone can lead us to our destination. And we consider Christ as the teacher with a capital T. He is the teacher, the ultimate teacher, the teacher of all teachers. And yet we may bear this title, and we understand what that title means, sort of lowercase t teacher. Our goal is to lead students entrusted to us to their destination, or at least the destination that we're assigned to lead them to. So, in the case of grammar, we're the teacher responsible to lead students to the destination of the knowledge and mastery of classical grammar. That's the role of the teacher. And again, in our generation, many of us haven't been there before. And so what we're trying to do is figure out how to successfully lead students to a destination that we ourselves are trying to reach for the first time. And that's a unique challenge. Obviously, it's a difficult one that we have to be prepared for. It's not going to be easy. We're going to have to be humble. We're going to have to be able to admit that we may get lost along the way and need to back up and start over again. That's just how this is going to go until we restore the classical liberal arts and develop a generation of students who have reached the destination and can go back and serve as reliable guides for future students. So, as the first generation of travelers, as it were, we may have been further along in the journey, or even, to put it more simply, we may appreciate the destination and understand why we should try to get there. And we want to offer that experience and that wisdom to children, even if we're not sure of the way ourselves. Now, fortunately, while we ourselves may not know the way, we're not left to ourselves. We have writings from throughout history of experienced grammarians and scholars, saints and doctors of the church who have reached that destination and who have explained to us the way. So for us as teachers, the challenge is that we subject ourselves to the advice and instructions of those ancient schoolmasters, wise men, and doctors of the church, and follow the path that they have left for us. And that's really the role of a classical Catholic schoolmaster. His role is to follow the instructions left by wise men of the past who have achieved things that our generation doesn't understand. And that's really the mission of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. Our mission statement says to research, restore, publish, and teach the classical liberal arts. And the key is research and restore. We're not trying to set ourselves up as teachers as if we're the sources of the wisdom. We're simply doing the work of researching to find out what the great teachers have said, restoring the systems and the resources and the methods that they used and recommend to us, and then trying to publish and teach those courses and lessons and use those methods in modern circumstances with modern resources, modern technology, and to try to make it as effective as possible in the 21st century. So the mission of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy serves as sort of a model of the role of a teacher, especially when that teacher doesn't necessarily know the exact way to reach the destination that he's trying to lead students toward. So that's the role of a teacher. The role of a teacher is a guide on a journey trying to reach a destination which he himself has not visited, but which others have left him instructions so that he can know the way, so long as he follows those instructions. The role of the teacher. Don't try to set yourself up as, the lecturer who has all the answers, who draws all the students to himself. Don't make students dependent on you as if you're the teacher who's been to the destination. Rather, teach your students who the true teachers are and help them to become independent so that they can study those teachers directly and follow their instructions. That's the role of a teacher, especially in this generation where classical Catholic education has been lost. Avoid the dangers of the modern idea of a teacher, which is this kind of standing, shooting from the hip lecturer who has all the answers. That's not a true teacher. We don't have all the answers, and we are not the capital T teacher. Our job is simply to help students reach the destination, and the primary way we're going to do that in this generation is by researching and finding the advice and instructions of the ancients, and then restoring and publishing and teaching that to children who are growing up and receiving their education in their youth. So understand the role of a teacher in the teaching of classical grammar. Secondly, as the guide to the students, the children are being asked to follow their teachers step by step on a journey where they have no idea where they're going, and even more difficult, they may not necessarily appreciate the destination that they're being asked to pursue. And so we have to understand that as the teacher, our job is to understand clearly the goal of what we're teaching, and understand that our students don't necessarily understand or appreciate that goal. So, as Plato taught in the Republic, we have to respect the fact and the reality that our children and our students don't understand the value of the things that we're trying to get them to study. We have to understand that, and we have to deal with the children reasonably. They can't be expected to sacrifice present pleasures and comforts in pursuit of some abstract idea or spiritual end. We just can't ask that of children. If our children were capable of appreciating some abstract spiritual goal, they would already be finished with education. They would already be wise and wouldn't need an education. So the work of a teacher is to motivate and help a student pursue something that at this point in his or her life is simply beyond their comprehension. And the way that we do that is by providing them with short-term goals and rewards and punishments that they appreciate and understand. So, in the sense of grammar, what we're trying to do is take young children and use their youth to store up in them and train them in good habits of communication. We want to build in them a very rich vocabulary. We want to teach them the rules of language. And there's a goal in all of this that we have to always focus on. The goal is that truth is very complicated. Truth is not simple. Wisdom doesn't consist of moving away from learning and away from hair-splitting disputations and controversies into some simple world of black and white statements. That's not how the truth works. We have to have wisdom, and wisdom requires us to split hairs and carefully divide between what's true and what's false. With my classroom students, I've always used an illustration of crayon boxes. Most of us are like a box with 8 crayons. You just have your primary colors, your basic colors: red, blue, yellow, green, brown, orange, purple, white, and black, and that's pretty much it. But then there's that 64 pack of crayons where you've got all different shades and tints and colors in that box. Truth requires you to be a 64 pack box of crayons. You can't enter into the truth and expect the truth to be understood or communicated with just those 8 colors. Now, those 8 colors can be combined to produce all of the colors in the big box. And that's the work of education. The work of education is taking children who have this basic set of human faculties and training them so that they can possess a range and a spectrum of different shades and understand those things and distinguish between slight differences in ideas, in statements, in words, and so forth. Because the truth requires that kind of carefulness and exactness. The goal of grammar is to provide children with the language skills that they're going to need to be able to think and reason and communicate truthfully, because it's going to take complexity, it's going to take subtlety. If you look at the opening lines of the book of Proverbs, Solomon explains that the purpose of his Proverbs is to give subtlety to the simple. That's the idea of education and what we're trying to accomplish in grammar. Grammar is the beginning of that education. It's the beginning of that process. Now, what we do in grammar is we focus on 4 divisions of this art, 4 divisions of the study of language that make up for us the art of grammar. The first and simplest is orthography. That's the study of the letters that we use and the sounds that they represent to make up a language. We teach children how to read and to spell and to write simply. That's orthography. To speak clearly, to articulate words clearly. That's the study of orthography, which is the first part of grammar. Now, once they're able to read and speak and write, what we see is that there's a seemingly infinite number of words. And how are they to be learned? How are they to be studied? How are they to be mastered? How are we to lead children to gain mastery of their language or command of their language? We can't study words individually. We can't teach our children by walking through a dictionary. If we take the Oxford Dictionary, there are tens of thousands of words. To study every word individually, its part of speech, its definition, its uses, its different meanings in different contexts, different senses, would take forever. And that's simply not possible, especially when we consider that to be truly learned, you would have to do this for multiple languages. So wise men in the past established the art of teaching and learning grammar, and it primarily works through the study of the parts of speech. The second part of grammar is called etymology. And you may have heard that word before, because we use the term etymology to discuss the history and derivation of words that are in use in a language. But that's not what we're talking about here. That's sort of a historical etymology. We're talking about the etymology in the sense of the cases and forms of the parts of speech and how words are put together and what they signify. So the second part of grammar is etymology. The first part's orthography, that has to deal with letters and sounds. The second part is etymology, it has to deal with words. And all of these tens of thousands of words can be arranged into 8 classes, at least in classical grammar, in 8 classes. And these 8 classes of words are called the parts of speech, because they are the building blocks or elements from which all speech is composed. Now, what we're doing in teaching the parts of speech is we're teaching the children that though there are many thousands of words, yet there are only 8 parts of speech. And if we learn the qualities and characteristics of each of the 8 parts of speech, we will know the essential features of all of the words contained in each of those 8 classes. So by learning the 8 parts of speech in the study of etymology, we can know something, and not just something, but we can know what's actually most important about every word in a language. So etymology serves the goal of grammar in that it helps us to enable our students to build a broad range of vocabulary, because even if they've never seen a certain word before, they can look at it, identify its part of speech, and already know all sorts of important information about that word, how it's used, what its form signifies, and so forth. Okay, so the goal of grammar, again, is to lead children to a subtlety of language that serves the investigation of truth, and the parts of speech allow students to develop a broad vocabulary and allow them to attack words that they encounter in readings, because they can immediately know characteristics of words by simply identifying the part of speech that that word belongs to. Okay, so that's the second part of classical grammar. Those first two parts, orthography and etymology, we study them in Latin grammar or Greek grammar 1. So the first course that we teach usually covers the first book of a classical grammar textbook. And in that first section, we study orthography and etymology. So if you've got little ones getting started, that's where your focus is going to be. You're going to be focused on teaching them, the Latin alphabet, the Greek alphabet, the sounds of the letters, how to pronounce the syllables, the diphthongs. And then you're going to move into etymology and teach them the different cases of the words, the different parts of speech, what these different forms signify, and so on. That's the study of classical grammar at the first level. The second level, which is the third part of grammar, is syntax. And syntax simply means construction. It's the construction of propositions and sentences. So having mastered the 8 parts of speech and being able to attack any word and analyze it according to its etymology, students now learn to do the same thing with propositions and sentences that express full ideas. So in the third part of grammar, students learn the rules of construction or syntax. We study that in Latin grammar or Greek grammar 2. The second level course is devoted to syntax or construction. And then lastly, the fourth part of classical grammar is called prosody, which is a word that's not very commonly used today. But prosody refers to the correct articulation of the language with regard to accents, rhythm, meter, and such things. And so you can see how prosody is usually associated with poetry, because that's where we get into meter and accent and rhyme scheme and all those sorts of things. Prosody is not necessarily the study of poetry, but because it studies the qualities that are examined in poetry, they get lumped together. So the 4 parts of grammar: orthography, the study of letters and sounds; etymology, the study of words, of the parts of speech; third, syntax, the study of the construction of sentences; and then fourth, prosody, the study of accent, meter, and poetry, which sort of flows from that study. So those are the 4 parts of grammar. The goal of that study is to provide children with the language skills and tools that will enable them to develop a subtlety of language that will allow them to understand and communicate all dimensions and all aspects of human thought and experience. So if there's a feeling, we don't want to necessarily label that feeling as love or hate. There are many different different shades of love and hate, and most of them have their own term or name. That subtlety is necessary for communication. That subtlety is necessary not just for communication with others, but for thinking ourselves, because we think in terms of language. That's the whole point of Aristotle's logic. We can't separate ideas and words, because in our minds, ideas and words go together. If we don't have words capable of expressing or signifying certain ideas, we actually can't think of those ideas. We can't reason, we can't use those ideas, because we can't accurately name them. Now, one exercise that I always do with students in classes is I use drawing to demonstrate this reality, okay? If you ask a student to think of a cat, most students will think that they know what a cat looks like, but they're deceived. They actually don't know what a cat looks like. And we can prove this by asking them to draw a picture of the image in their mind of a cat. So if you know what a cat looks like, take out a sheet of paper and draw a picture of a cat. Draw that picture, that image in your mind that you claim to accurately comprehend. Draw that for us. Children won't be able to do it. And I don't just mean little children. Adult students will not be able to accurately draw a cat. Now, what everyone will do is they will say, I'm not a good artist, or I'm not good at drawing. But that's actually not the problem. The problem that's revealed by the challenge of being asked to draw is that they think that they know what a cat is and what a cat looks like. But the reality is that they don't. They're familiar with a cat. They think they know what a cat is, but if asked to actually draw a cat, they won't be able to. The cat will not even look remotely like a cat. The same thing will happen if we ask a student to describe in words that same object. The description will not be accurate. If you ask a child or any student, ask a student to define something common. Define a cat. What is a cat? And to give a definition, you'll find that they cannot give a definition that excludes all other animals. They cannot express the essence or substance of what a cat is. Everyone thinks that they can, but when challenged to actually do it, they can't. Now, take these students and move them into high school and ask them to write an essay. Is there any surprise to be had when we find that these students can't write an essay? These students can't define things. These students can't draw simple objects. Of course they can't articulate complex ideas. And so in the study of grammar, this is what we're trying to develop. We're trying to develop the actual ability of students to name things accurately, to define things accurately, to articulate words accurately, to think accurately, and then to be able to communicate accurately. The children aren't struggling because they haven't studied logic or rhetoric or writing. Most students who are struggling because they've never learned grammar. They've never learned the simple art of the parts of speech and sentence construction, rightly naming things, and so on. So this is why grammar really becomes the foundation for all future learning, and it has to be given primacy in the curriculum, because if students don't learn this art, they really cannot advance into the other attractive arts that everyone wants to rush into. They simply can't. They don't have all of the crayons that are needed to color those pictures, as it were. So, to wrap up for this first lesson, because I'm sure that you find that pretty helpful. I know that those topics are usually interesting to students and other adults that I speak with, and there's just a lot to think about. So I know you're going to want to chew on that a little bit, and there's probably some things you'd like to ask that we can talk about and get into those topics a little more in detail. What I hope is that this sort of gives you a vision for what your work needs to look like as a teacher, and gives you some ideas for how to go about that work as a teacher, to understand what your role actually is as the teacher and what it's not. You're not being asked to act as if you're the source of the truth. Most teachers put that pressure upon themselves and create a classroom or create an environment that's just going to fail because they are not capable of being that teacher. And then secondly, to always keep in mind the goal of grammar so you don't get lost in nonsense. If you look around, you can see schools that try to teach Latin and they just get lost in like chanting declensions or chanting Latin endings or vocabulary. And they forget the goal of grammar, or they never focus on it at all. So by always remembering what the goal is, we can avoid making errors in teaching grammar. We can avoid oversimplifying language. We can avoid wasting time on things that really aren't that important but are easy for teachers. That's another danger that teachers fall into. We as the teacher are responsible to keep our eyes focused on the goal and try to lead students there as efficiently as possible. The only other thing I'd like to say as I summarize this is that the one point that I made earlier is that children can't be asked to work for abstract goals or to work for goals that are only appreciated by people with experience in the world or in life. You have to use short-term, simple rewards to get students to work through their youth and treasure up this knowledge, because later on, as they mature, when they get into their teen years, they start to think about their future, they start to be motivated to seek independence and so on. At that time, a lot of these issues, a lot of these goal issues are going to become more understandable to them. The problem, though, is that when kids come to that point, they haven't treasured up the knowledge that they should have and could have in their youth. And so they're either left to try and start from the beginning as 18 years old, which is basically what college is today. College is sort of a chance for 18-year-old students to start from scratch and get an education, because the K-12 education they received didn't focus on the right things, didn't teach the right ways, didn't focus on memorization, didn't focus on treasuring up knowledge for the future and for developing good habits to use in the future. It was always focused on, age appropriate this and grade level that, focused on the students understanding at, age 9. And that's not what education is for. Everything in education is for the future. And so as we teach grammar, the reason why memorization of rules and memorization of forms and memorization of principles is so important is because we're teaching children things that really they're not going to use today. They're going to use them in 20, 30, 40 years from now. And to motivate the kids, we have to find short-term, simple rewards that they're willing to work for, to do this work, to sort of indirectly pursue the knowledge of grammar by what appears to them as a pursuit of these sensible, visible, tangible rewards that make sense to them when they're young. So don't try to get abstract with grammar. Don't try to have young students study grammar for the sake of the future benefits it offers. That's really not reasonable to ask students to think and study like that. Set up a class, set up a system where children are rewarded or penalized for simple tasks. Memorize a vocabulary list, memorize a declension of nouns, memorize a conjugation of verbs, memorize the definitions of the 8 parts of speech. All of that sort of memory work, storing up accurate definitions, accurate summaries of forms and things like that, all of that knowledge is going to help the children in the future. Wasting time trying to understand things when you're 8 and 9 years old is just a waste of time and really doesn't need to be done. Let simple rewards motivate the students to do things that are necessary for their future studies when their bodies and minds and souls mature and develop, and they're able to think about and appreciate more complex, more mature ideas. So understand the goal of grammar, the role of the teacher, and remember, there's really not a lot of pressure on you. You may have never studied these things before, but others have. And so if you have a right disposition, you'll submit to the counsel and advice of those who have achieved these things, who have reached these destinations. And that's really what we focus on in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. You'll very rarely see a lesson where the author is William Michael. That would be a total waste of time. What I seek to do is go back and find the instructions and the resources and the texts, even the methods that were used by successful, proven teachers of the past, and then I try to find out how I can restore those lessons and make them accessible to students using modern technology. And as a teacher, that's what I encourage you to think of as your own role. You don't have to pretend that you're the guru who knows everything. And you shouldn't create a class where the students all look to you as if you're the lighthouse, from the source from which all the light comes. You should simply be a fellow student who is following the advice and counsel of wise men and seeking wise things for good purposes. So avoid setting yourself up as the capital T teacher, because if you do so, eventually your students are going to wisen up and they're going to see that you're faking it, and a lot of the things that you said and taught aren't even really true. And in the end, you're going to be embarrassed. So it's better to humble yourself, take your true role as a teacher, trying to restore classical Catholic studies in the 21st century, and you'll find that teaching is actually pretty pleasant. There's no pressure on you, and really, as long as you can follow the instruction and advice of the elders, you'll have success. You'll have success in running these classes and teaching these subjects if you can just follow the advice of the wise. So I hope that's a helpful beginning for our study of the art of grammar. As I said, today I wanted to discuss the role of the teacher and the goal of grammar. I think we've done that. If you have any questions, I'm happy to get into these things in detail. And by detail, I mean even practical, everyday teacher-student details of class and homeschool or private school, whatever you're working on. You want to talk about the details of how to set up a class, how to prepare lesson materials, what to do in class, all those sort of practical things. I know that those things matter, and if you'd like to discuss those things, I'm very happy to do so. In our future lessons, we're just going to fly over and survey the entire art of classical grammar. We'll probably spend 35 weeks or so covering one topic per week, and my hope is that by the end of this class, you'll not only be able to think of your role as the teacher, the goal of the study, but you'll have a pretty good sense of what's to be studied through the four parts of grammar. And most importantly, you'll know what you don't know, and that will help you to continue in your own studies and avoid making mistakes talking about things before you have a chance to learn them. So I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions, please contact me and we'll discuss these things as far into the details as you'd like. As I said, I hope that's helpful. God bless.